Okay, welcome to this short sharing about the generative AI-assisted evidence-informed use of L1 and L2 classrooms. My name is Benjamin Moorhouse, and I'm an assistant professor of English language education at Hong Kong Baptist University. So, all of us would be aware that generative AI tools like ChatGPT are transforming and disrupting the field of education. We can't escape the realities that these tools exist. They're highly user-friendly, and we can find great utility in automating a number of processes that would have taken a lot of time before, or would have required a lot of manpower to achieve in a very fast, effective way. But we're now trying to understand how can AI help teachers in English language teaching to more effectively implement pedagogies that we know to be effective but have been difficult to do because of things like resources, time, and manpower. And one of these is the use of L1 to support L2 learning. So in this presentation, we're going to look at some of the traditional ways of thinking about the use of L1 and L2 classroom. We're then going to look at a small study that I conducted, looking at some explorations of ways that generative AI could help teachers, specifically English language teachers, to use L1 in the L2 classroom. And then there'll be some implications for practice at the end and some words of caution as well. So actually the literature is very supportive of the idea that L1 can be a supportive tool and assist in L2 learning. L1 is students have that as a resource already. It's something that they have, and it's something that can be used by the teacher to help them to connect what they're learning in the L2 to what they already know in the L1. Strategic and purposeful use of L1 can enhance L2 learning. So we have to look carefully at the different strategies that we use, the different ways that we think about L1 in the classroom, and think about which ones are effective or not. So a few suggestions in the literature are things like scaffolding, so supporting students in completing tasks, engaging with content with L1 as a resource in that process, with either students using L1 or teachers using L1 to help understand concepts and ideas they're learning. Raising interest, so if students aren't able to comprehend what's happening in a lesson, or you want to connect with their previous experiences or knowledge, L1 can be a resource for that. Making cross-language comparisons, so comparing how particular language is used, how particular language is presented, or particular ideas are presented in one language, and comparing that to another language. And recasting extended student contributions, so students may only be able to give short responses in the L2. That can be scaffolded by the teacher using L1 or by other students, and then students can then be encouraged to respond again in L2 using the additional information that's provided, so it extends their contribution to provide more opportunity for student contributions. But of course there are a number of challenges for language teachers. There are deep-rooted monolingual immersion approaches that are commonly seen across the English language teaching community, but also specifically in Hong Kong, where school policies, parents, and even students themselves may not be comfortable with a teacher using L1 in the classroom. And of course there are reasons for this. The teacher is the main provider of input in many contexts, and if the overuse of L1 in the classroom, the students may not have enough opportunity to be exposed to L1 input. And equally, if they produce too much L1 in the L2 classroom, they may not have opportunities to practice their L2. However, this has kind of led to the idea that no L1 is allowed at all, and that the use of L1 can erode the learning experience or opportunity for students to learn language, which is probably not the case. Because of this, though, in teacher education programs and professional development, rarely is the use of L1 mentioned in the L2 classroom. So teachers are not equipped with strategic and purposeful use of L1 either. And of course, a big thing can be that teachers may not share the same L1 with their learners, or know the L1 system well enough we all assume that in Hong Kong all our students may share the same L1, but that's not always the case. And it can be very time consuming to create activities that help learners connect their L1 knowledge and L2 learning. So this can be a really challenge for us, because we may see the value of using L1, but then how do we actually produce activities that exploit that knowledge or capitalize on that knowledge to help our students to learn better? So can generative AI tools help address these challenges? So we did a small study in one of my MEd courses. It's called Grammar for Teaching. This is a course that is basically aimed at helping teachers to connect and learn the knowledge needed to effectively teach grammar in schools. And we did a short intervention where I produced a pre-recorded lecture with some explicit instruction on the use of L1 in the L2 classroom, kind of the benefits of it, challenging some of the myths around the L1, so they kind of understood more about the strategic use and evidence-based practices. We then did some in-person tutorial with exploratory activities where we looked at how generative AI might be able to help teachers in the classroom. So what kinds of things could they use it for? And I'm going to show you some examples of those. We collected some data to see if this intervention had any benefit. Did it help teachers become more aware of how they might use L1 effectively, and do they have more ideas of how they could use generative AI to help them? So I'll share some of the results of that as well. So here's a few of the example activities. So these are ones that we've made actually since then. We're using a more up-to-date GPT-4o. We wanted to keep the most updated one so you could see the potential of these tools. So what we did is look at some different activities. So one of them is researching differences and similarities between L1 and L2. So as a teacher, we may be going into our classroom thinking, okay, I need to teach things like personal pronouns today. These are the words I need to teach in English, but I've got speakers in my class who speak Chinese, French, and Japanese. So perhaps I want to know how personal pronouns work in these different languages, so I can see if there's any kind of difficulties that they may face between these languages. You know, in English, for example, we don't have a plural version of you. In other languages, they do. So this could be a point of difficulty. Being aware of this can help us focus on the bits which are difficult and spend less time on the bits that are easy, right? And then this can be useful for us. Okay, so here's a suggested prompt. I'm an English language teacher. My students speak Chinese, French, and Japanese as first languages. Create a table indicating the differences and similarities in the use of pronouns in the different languages. And you can see here it creates this table. You could then extend this and say, okay, based on this, could you tell me what I should focus on in the lesson? What challenges would my students face when learning pronouns? Things like that, so you can kind of build on that and gain more knowledge that helps you to more effectively teach that particular grammar item in the class or the grammar feature in the class. Another one which we found particularly effective is creating cross-language comparison activities. So these are generally hard for teachers to do because they're very labor-intensive to make, but they can be really good at helping students notice and raising their awareness of difference around language. So for example, looking at things like tenses, tense systems between Chinese and English are very different, and we need to be conscious of those differences when we're teaching, and students may also be aware of want to be aware of those differences. So creating example sentences, creating activities where students have to match structures together from one language to another can be good ways for them to become more aware of those differences, so that consciousness will make them more likely to be more accurate in their L2 use. So here's an example here of one that's been made. So you're an English language teacher, your students are A2 CEFR level, which is the European framework for language proficiency levels. Create a sentence comparison activity that compares the form and use of simple past tense in English and Chinese, and we can see this here. So you can create different activities, but you can also create the supporting materials as well, like worksheets and things like that. Sometimes it's not just the students who may speak multiple languages, it's also the parents as well. And for parents to be engaged in students' learning and understand what the teachers are asking them to do, sometimes they may need instructions in a language. Equally, if we're working with less proficient students, the instructions for a task can be more difficult than the task language itself. So this can create challenges for students, as they may have the language for the task, but they don't have the language to understand the instructions for the task. So we can see here an example of an activity that has been translated, or the task instructions have been translated into multiple languages. So of course there may be slight errors in the translation, and this can be remedied by telling the parents and students that this has been generated by AI to support them, and they could even be asked to give feedback on the accuracy, so you can address that if you need to use these instructions in the future. But it's very quick, very efficient way, and even if you don't use the first language, you can still create those instructions to support students in completing those activities. And we found through anecdotal experimentation that the translations are far more coherent than we might get from Google Translate or other kind of more traditional translation machine translation tools. And another one is to use it to analyze learner errors. So sometimes learners make errors, and then we want to analyze those errors to ensure that to understand why they've made those errors. So feeding in the students' work into these tools, obviously with their consent and permission and awareness of risk and privacy risk, we can then ask them to ask those tools to analyze these texts, and then think about why a learner of that language may have made them, so we can then become more aware of which ones we need to work on in class to effectively support learners. Sorry. So here's a bit about the study then. So we had a couple of research questions. How does explicit instruction affect pre-service English language teachers' beliefs about evidence-informed use of L1 and L2 language classrooms, and their intention to use L1 and L2 in their future English classrooms? And how can AI tools assist pre-service English language teaching using L1 in their future English language teaching? So actually we found the short intervention of just raising awareness of the strategic use of L1 actually had quite a positive response. The intention improved. The intention to use L1 increased quite dramatically, and I'll show you that here. So we can see in the pre-intervention many of the students mentioned that there was issues around the need to avoid it, should be prioritized, that it could lead to poor L2 development, and that it could be inappropriate. However, we saw in the post one that they were more positive towards this, and they had more ideas about how they might go about using L1 in the L2 classroom. So they became more aware that this is something of a professional decision-making and strategic use of L1 rather than a kind of diagrammatic I should use or I can't use it kind of understanding of it from their previous experiences of teachers using it in their classrooms or their beliefs about the monolingual approach. And then we also found teachers became more aware, which is probably obvious because we introduced different ways, but they seem to have become aware of those ways as well. So in the post-intervention survey and interviews, they mentioned about the ways that generative AI may assist them. So the things like we just mentioned, providing knowledge about L1 and L2 language systems, increasing their professional knowledge, addressing their L1 shortcomings, but just because they speak an L1 doesn't mean that they know how the systems in that L1 work. Right, because we don't learn it explicitly like we do with the L2, and they can become more aware of the similarities and differences between languages, which can make them more effective teachers in the classroom. Equally, they could see that they could use it to create different kinds of teaching materials and activities, and helping learners to comprehend task requirements by having semi-translation or full translations of task instructions. And equally, which is one thing we didn't raise a lot in the intervention but came up in the interviews and the survey, was that actually students may be able to use these tools themselves, obviously with teachers providing instructions on how they might do that. So working as kind of a personal assistant for students, so they can interact it within their L1, getting guidance and support on different ideas, input L2 writing and get feedback in L1 so they can see where the errors are and get feedback that they can comprehend, create their own activities that might be useful for their own self-study, translate words and content from L1 to L2 and vice versa, so it becomes more fluid between the two and they can kind of see the connections between the two languages, but they can also comprehend kind of input they're being provided with. So what are the implications then? Well, the implications are for teacher education, I think, is that we know that actually if we introduce the strategic use of L1 in the L2 classroom, then students are quite receptive to that, and they're likely to become more positive towards the use of L1 in the classroom, which is a great thing. So we don't need to spend lots of time on it, but if we introduce it, discuss it more critically, provide evidence-based examples, then they become more aware that generative AI tools can act as a resource for teachers to develop these things, which may have taken a lot of time before to do, but now is actually very easy. We may have needed lots of resource books in multiple languages to do this before, but now we have a tool that can do this very effectively for us. Similarly with creating language activities as well. So these are really important benefits. So just a word of caution though, I think it's always important to be conscious that teachers still need to be professional. They still need to look at the content that's produced by these tools and make sure they are accurate and suitable for their learners. Here's just a short example here where the chatbot was asked to create a sentence comparison activity looking at the simple past, but actually in the Chinese version use the particle le, which indicates perfective aspect, not just the simple past. So this is a kind of a nuanced issue here that may not fully affect the activity, but it's something teachers would need to be aware of if they were to use this as a kind of a language comparison activity to make sure students were aware of that, or they may need to revise the prompt to provide a more suitable translation. There are obviously biased information in these models as well that could reinforce stereotypes and other things, and of course there's issues around copyright, privacy, and things like this that I need to be aware of. This presentation didn't really focus on these, but you can definitely explore more about the ethical concerns around generative AI and language teaching, and that should help you to kind of gain a better understanding of when to use them, how to use them, and what the impact of using them might be. So here's a few references that were used in this presentation which might be useful for you. There's a few more articles coming out about generative AI and language teaching. I have a few that have been published already and a few more that will be coming out soon. This paper that I presented today is actually under review with English Language Teaching Journal, so it may be published hopefully within this year. We'll see. If you are more interested in this, feel free to connect or reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on ResearchGate. If you do a Google search for my name, I'm sure I'll be the first one to come up. So thank you for listening. I hope you found this useful, and I encourage you to explore how you might use generative AI to support the use of support you to use L1 in your English language classroom.